right, hey guys, I'm Professor Wright over at Eastern New Mexico University. Today I'm making a quick video demonstrating the full process of basically like your first throwing lesson. Throwing is a word we use for making pots on the pottery wheel, if you aren't familiar with that term. And yeah, today's is basically just a full-on like intro on how to do this process start to finish. We're going to make a basic straight up and down cylinder, because if you can master that shape, you can go a lot of directions with it. You pretty much can go anywhere besides maybe flat plates or something like that. So it's always a good one. This is my first time recording like this full process from start to finish in one take in a video, so bear with me. It might be pretty long. I'm also trying to make sure I cover everything as far as what materials to have, everything ready, how to store stuff afterwards, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, jumping into it, again, this is just our basic throwing demo. For if you can honestly use this even if you saw my demoing class as like some extra practice, or if I'm out or something on the throwing day for you, you can use this. So getting into what tools you're gonna need. First of all, of course, you're gonna need clay. For today's lesson, I'd say 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds of clay. This is about 1.5 pounds. You need it to be nicely wedged up. You should have gotten a wedging demo in class with me. If you need extra practice or pointers with that, ask your classmates, look at videos, that kind of thing. Or my stand-in instructor during time that I may be out might be able to help you with that. So yeah, be sure it's really wedged up. It should be nice, like lots of wedging, right? Get good practice for this. Wedging is more important for throwing than necessarily it is for hand building. So should be sure for that. And then also you can kind of like pound the clay. I prefer to pound it into like a gumdrop shape is what I always say before I start making pots on the wheel. A lot of people like to make just nice little spheres. That's fine. I don't know, I find it just works better as a gumdrop. But the big thing is you don't want this big lumpy crazy looking. It shouldn't look like your ram's head from wedging when you put it on the wheel right now. So yeah, there's that, the clay. You'll also need a sponge, as well as a rib. Actually, the most important part, besides clay, the most important tools you need is water, right? You need a bucket of water. That's going to be super important. And then the other thing you need is the wire tool. The wire tool is used for cutting the pot off of the bat at the end. Other than that, you don't really need anything else. You can do everything just fine with your water and a wire tool. The next most important thing would be a sponge, right, to be able to get water out of the inside. I might almost say it's essential too, but it's, you may be able to throw so there's not water left in the bottom, and you don't even really need a sponge at that point. But sponge is pretty dang important. And then after that, you want something like a stick tool or a rib. They're called ribs because they used to use like animal ribs, like donkey ribs, goat ribs, sheep ribs, whatever, even smaller ribs, I guess, if you wanted to, just depending on what they needed. But now we make them out of wood or metal. For throwing, I always say wooden rib, maybe a rubber rib, but I don't use metal ribs at all during throwing. You want to avoid that. In my experience, it's not as helpful, and I don't know, if it gets caught, it can actually cut you and stuff like that. But yeah, you might use a needle tool for like leveling things out, or popping holes that you have if you didn't wedge enough to get all the air bubbles out. But the essential things you need are just what I've said so far. So the clay, the water, the wire tool, the rib, and the sponge, okay? That's all you really need for this throwing demo. There's all kinds of other tools you could use. But yeah, that's your basics. So I guess I would call it a tool, but another thing you still also need would be a bat. And I say it's kind of optional because some wheels you don't always have to use a bat on a wheel. Some wheels don't have the pins for bats to be held in place, the bat pins. So you can always just work directly on the wheel head if that's the kind of wheel you're using. That's great for cups and things that are really easy for you to pick up. It starts to get more difficult to work without a bat if you're making larger things like plates and stuff like that. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. But yeah, what bats are is they're basically discs that will sit on your wheel head. They're secured in place by the bat pins. They're usually pretty universal measurements as far as how they relate to the bat pins and stuff, but there are different kinds of bats. We have square ones here, we have different size ones. My preference are these brown ones with the sort of webbing on the back. Although students kind of tend to really like the black plain bats, mainly because I think it's because they're easier to get on. But these also have a tendency to be a little more wobbly or something. The holes aren't as uniform, and so they can get a little clicky or something while you're working. These, in my opinion, they are more secure, they hold a little better, but they are more difficult to get on. And then the square ones are similar to this, but they're square. I've never really liked those because it messes with my head to put a square disc on a circle thing. But yeah, anyway, these are just really great, again, for you can still pick up cups and smaller things just off of the bat and keep working on the same bat. But say you ever accidentally make something too wide, or it's too soft for you to pick up, or you do intentionally make a plate or something that you just can't pick up immediately, but you want to keep working on your wheel, it's great because you pick these up and set them aside. Okay, so you will need a bat for most of ours. If you use our kick wheels, which isn't really what I'm demoing on, but you can tell by the name, and if you look at them, you can pretty much figure out how to use a kick wheel. You can always watch a video. If you ever want to try that as a student in here, it is an option. Be a little careful. They're a little more old school and like cumbersome. But yeah, totally workable, but those don't use bats. But let me go ahead and keep talking about bats for a minute in terms of how you get them onto the wheel. So the black ones are super duper easy. You look at the two holes, you line them up with the pins, you set them down. Boom, super easy, good to go. But you'll notice you can hear that click. That's because, like I said, these tend to not be quite as universally sized. There's a little bit of slack, and so it's not my favorite. There are strategies like putting a little daub of clay or something underneath it or around the bat pins, and that's okay, but you got to make sure you clean those up, and I generally recommend against it. The other thing is, I find the black bats, they work better on the smooth side than they do on the textured side, which is sort of weird and seems backwards, but that's just my personal experience. And yeah, like I said, they're not my favorite. So I'm gonna use the brown bats, or sometimes I use the same brand and everything, but they're orange or blue. I have one sitting over there, is why I pointed. But yeah, these are a little trickier to get on. Let's talk about how to. So you'll see on these, there's actually two different sets of bat pin holes. They're for different sized wheels. Ours are the wider ones, and they're actually, so they're lined up. Let me see if I can get this pointed out. If you look at the rim of the bat, you can see there's 3 nibs right there, and there's 1 nib here, and then 3 again, and 1. And they essentially, like, these 2 are the 3 nib, and these 2 are the 1 nib. So we use the 3 nib with holes, if that makes sense, right? So you'll put your hand right on the 3 nibs, find the hole underneath both sides like this, and you'll get ready to set it on here. What I recommend is you just choose one side. It's always my right hand, I find. It doesn't really matter which of these holes it is, but you're gonna set it down where you can really just like feel it right in place, and you'll set it, and if you'll know it's secure because if you go kind of jiggle it, it doesn't slide around too much. And then all you can really do on this other side is slide your finger underneath right below those 3 nibs, and then get it as close as you can before you have to slide your finger out and then set it down. And again, you'll know you're good if it's really nice and secure. If there's any slack at all, that might mean you're just inside one of the little webbing triangles and you're not actually in the bat pin holes. But yeah, that pretty much demonstrates how to do that. So there's a bat, you want to be set up for this. When you're throwing, if you're doing a lot of stuff, and especially if you know your wide stuff, you want to have a few bats around. And then another tool that's very handy in terms of things to just kind of have around while you're throwing. Before you start, what you want to do is make sure you have a board or something, a bat covered in newspaper or something, that basically you know you're going to put your pot on when you're done, because you can't leave the pot on the wheel, especially if there's other classes coming in or other work times. You gotta leave, I don't know, you got to take it off the wheel and you got to set it on your board. So have that ready before you start throwing. That's always a good idea. Have your newspaper covered board, newspaper covered bat, or whatever ready, sitting somewhere nearby, so that when you're done, you pick it up, you can set it on that, okay? And then other than that, we have aprons here on the wall, and then you should also have your towel handy. I think it's good to have both of these, mainly because at some point you're gonna have super crusty, wet hands, and if you wipe them on our aprons, it's gonna get way too dirty way too fast, and then we have to clean the aprons too often. What you want is to think of the apron as just protecting your clothes, okay? It's not for you to wipe your hands on. Maybe a little bit here and there, but it's not supposed to be for that. The towel is where you wipe. You can see this one's got crusties all up on it. This is where you wipe your hands when they're really dirty and you need to get a lot off. You use the towel. So always have that ready, and then the aprons, again, should just be for splash protection for your clothes, okay? I think that is enough about tools. Yeah, good bucket of water. Be sure that it's very full, okay? Not all the way full to the top, but like 3/4 full. I see students all the time, they fill their water bucket up like 2 or 3 inches, and then they got to reach in there and they barely got enough water. We don't want that. You want a good amount of water. We can always, recycle it and do all kinds of stuff with it. Don't worry, it's not a waste of water. But yeah, You want to do that. You want to put your bucket of clay or your bucket of water very close to where you're going to be working. Be sure the splash pan, more demos, I keep thinking of more things to tell you. The splash pans on our wheels are very easy to end up accidentally putting on loosely. Let me show you what that looks like. You can just slide it on and it's kind of up high and it's moving a lot like this. What's happened is you have put the splash pan on, but you didn't put this little ridge underneath the plate that's going to hold it secure. So what you have to do is push your splash pan down as far as you can and be sure that that little ridge scoops up under this. Sorry, too far down. But you make sure it slides under the plate that's going to hold it in place, and then you got to do that with both sides. And be sure you kind of like slam on both sides. Normally you have to do this from the side, and be sure they're secure. And if you try to lift up on these splash pans, it shouldn't be a lot of slack. It should be nice and secure. You want to be sure that's in place before you start to. And then anyway, getting back to your water is right outside your splash pan by your right hand typically. I guess you can put it by your left if you're left-handed. But yeah, that's what you want. Then you're going to make sure your wheel is plugged in. You're going to turn the switch on here on the side, and then you're going to, before you turn that switch on, be sure your pedal's off. And then let's talk a little bit about how the pedals work. What you want to do in terms of positioning and getting your pedal and stuff ready, pull up as close to the wheel as you can, okay? This wheel head and the bat and all the area you're going to work on should be sort of between your thighs, not in front of it, okay? So yeah, pull up pretty close, get your pedal in a really good place. What I usually say is that before you start throwing, you should mess with the pedal a little bit, play with it some, okay? And the way that the pedal is going to work, I do want to demonstrate a little bit. Number one, it seems like a little redundant, but I want to talk about, you're going to set your whole foot on here like this. Don't just put your toe on it and kind of keep going back and forth using your toe. You're going to put your whole foot on the pedal, and you're going to use your toes to push down on the top portion of the pedal. And notice that the more you push, the faster it will go. You should be sure that you are going counterclockwise as well. If you're going clockwise, the other way, yeah, you need to reach over to the side, and there will be a switch next to the on and off switch that you need to toggle, okay? Most of our wheels will toggle. I will say, I just remember too, some of our wheels don't have splash pans. They're just big basin wheels, and that is okay too. So you may notice it's the Bailey big yellow wheels. They don't have a splash pan. So that whole demo I talked about saying, don't worry about that if you're using one of those. But anyway, yeah, and I think they also have a toggle, yeah. So all of our wheels pretty much have this ability to go back and forth between counterclockwise or clockwise. We are supposed to be going clockwise. It's confusing because actually on our wheels, that's reverse, right? At least on the Shimpo wheels or the Nidec wheels, it's labeled as reverse. We go in reverse. Most of these wheels are made in Asia and they go the other way in Asia. And so, yeah, you just need to keep that in mind. It's technically reverse, but counterclockwise. That's what's important. Forget forward and reverse. Just think you are supposed to go counterclockwise. Anyway, yeah, you push, and the faster you go, or the more you push, I guess, the faster it will go. You never need to go full speed, but you may need to find a faster speed at the beginning, and then remember that each step you slow down a little bit. And notice, okay, let's pretend this is my foot. Since I'm standing, I have to use my hands up here for this demo. But as you're messing with your pedal, while it's by your foot, left or right, doesn't really matter. You have your whole foot up here, pushing with your toes to go faster, and you need to slow it down with your heels, okay? So you push on the back to slow it down. Don't slow it down all at once. Go nice and slow. Good to go. And then I also want you to try one more thing, or mess with one more thing here. So get it going at good speed, and then take your foot off of the pedal, and you will notice that the wheel keeps going the same speed, okay? One of the first things I mentioned as a common mistake that beginners make is they are constantly changing the speed of their wheel. They go fast, they go slow, they stop to mess with it, they go too fast and start, and they go back and forth and back and forth. What you need to do is consciously, like, take a breath, go slow, find the speed that works for the step that you're on, and then take your foot off the pedal, okay? And just let it go that speed. You shouldn't be touching your pedal all that much. That's my recommendation. Maybe not all teachers would say it, but that's what my experience has taught me. So I'm gonna set this back down by my foot so I can talk about that a little bit more, okay? So again, yeah, push with my toes, it speeds up. The more I go, the faster it goes. Slow down with my heel. If I take my foot off, it stays the same speed, okay? The other tip I have right from the beginning for students is to point out that you don't want to put your hands on it and then start the wheel. okay? Or stop the wheel with your hand still on. Basically, if the pot's not spinning, you shouldn't be touching it, right? If it stopped like this, you shouldn't be touching it. You should start it, then put your hands on it, then take your hands off and stop it. Only be touching it while it's spinning, okay? Now, let's go ahead and get started on actually throwing. That's enough preface for now. So I usually start with a dry bat, and I'll slam the clay down and I'll start the centering process. I do want to say that typically when I teach this in person, I don't teach it all at once and then have students go, and I also don't allow students to go along with me like at the same time. Going along with me tends to make students more lost, because some are faster, some are slower. Doing it all at once and then having students go is too much. So what I do is I go in stages. So I'll tell you as I finish a stage what I would normally like. If you want to pause it, right? If you're watching this as you try to like learn this yourself, where I would like pause it and then you try to kind of catch up with what I've done so far, and then like you could stop when we get there and like start again. Okay, if that makes sense. Basically, I'll tell you good stop and start moments for you to do some things, then pause and watch more of the video, that kind of deal. So anyway, the first thing we want to do is center the clay. Let's get it down on the bat first. So I have my bat in place, it's dry, I have the clay ready to go, and I slam it down. You want to slam it down pretty firmly. You want to get it as close to the middle as you can. This is one of the few times I'll tell you can touch your clay without turning the wheel on. And basically how it works, what I want you to do is after you slam your clay down, just lightly sort of like squeeze and push down on your clay and let your hands spin the wheel kind of by hand. And what this will do is help your clay get a little bit more sealed to the bat, okay? It's very common for students to, when they start doing stuff, they fling their clay off of the bat. And I have a couple built-in ways to help teach you not to do that. But in any case, yeah, I've got this stuck down. And then the first thing I'm gonna do is start putting water on the clay. You need a lot of water, right? Your hands absorb a lot of water. Your clay absorbs a lot of water. And you're going to need quite a bit. You're going to need to keep reaching over and getting more. You're going to get it good and coated. Think of the water as lubricant that helps the clay slide through your hands. It's not to soften the clay. It's to help it move through your hands. So if it starts to dry, the clay is going to stick to your hands and tear off or stretch in the wrong direction, all kinds of stuff. You should make sure your clay is shiny, slippery, all that good stuff. Okay, so first thing I do, this is just for beginners. I have you guys push down with your left hand while it's spinning, and then take your right index finger and push just into this bottom corner right here to make a little, like a water seal on the bottom corner. That's an extra thing I just do for beginners to essentially make sure it doesn't slide off of the bat too easily. Makes it a little bit easier. Now, we're gonna start the real centering process, okay? Back again, more water, getting lots on there. Not too much. Right, you don't want a big slopping mess, but you need a good bit. You need enough for your hands to slide. And then what you want to do is take your hands, and what I always call this is T-Rex arms, right? You want to pull your elbows in so they're squeezing on your ribs, and it's just your forearms sticking out. So T-Rex arms. And then for you guys, if you're sitting at your wheel, what you should do is just bend over and lean down till your elbows hit your thighs, if that makes sense. I don't know if you guys can see that, but bend down till your elbows hit your thighs. And what this is gonna do is stabilize your arms. If you don't have those elbows on the thighs and you're working all like this, you're gonna have no stability, right? And if there's a few things. If you can't reach the clay with your elbows on your thighs, that might mean that you're not close enough to the wheel and you need to scoot forward. But sometimes people have different sized legs and arms and stuff like that, and you gotta adjust. You can do something where you lock your elbows more just like into your ribs, which is what I do as a standing thrower as well. And you can make that work. But the main thing is just keeping those elbows in tight, which is why I say the T-Rex arms thing, okay? Then we lean forward, elbows hitting the thighs. Then we put our palms together on the bat, right, behind the piece, and you just lean forward. You shouldn't have to push too much with your arms. You should just be able to lean forward like this. If your elbows are in the right place and your palms are together and sitting on the bat, boom, you get this. This is called coning for obvious reasons. It's just the first part of centering. You get the clay into a nice cone shape. If, when you're here, you feel like as you're leaning forward, you're not touching the clay, you're not reaching far enough, again, you might think about sitting closer to your wheel, right, more close up. Okay, anyway, right, we push in, get it nice and coned, okay? And think about, too, with this, it's about firm pressure. It's not about being strong, right? You're not pushing all the way across the wheel. You're just trying to get it right into the middle of itself in the middle of the wheel. Centering is about getting the clay symmetrical right here in the center of the wheel. So just think about that. Don't try to muscle it, just try to be firm and push it into place, okay? And now, after you've got it in a nice cone shape, it might not be perfectly smooth on the edges, it might be a little rough on top, but the main point is that overall it's in the middle of our bat. So now what we do is we lift up our right hand. What I say here is put your left hand down as like a wall, right? And this is a wall that you're gonna push the clay into, and it's not gonna move. Your left hand right now is what's gonna shape this ball of clay. Your right hand is what's moving it. So I push my right down here. I call this the plunger or a karate chop, right? Push down on the clay, and it squeezes the clay outward into my left hand. Okay, I'm gonna spin a little bit like this. A lot of people, and I often prefer just using the flat of my palm. It doesn't have to be a karate chop, but whichever is more comfortable for you. But you're essentially pushing. Also notice I'm using my right hand as like backup here for my left to be sure it's not going anywhere. But you're pushing down with your right hand and letting that clay take the shape of the inside of your left hand. Be careful not to let your fingertips catch here. Anytime you're working with your left hand on the outside of the clay, notice because we're going counterclockwise, you gotta watch those fingers. Some people prefer to switch it, push down with your left hand and use your right hand as a wall, but I find for beginners, it's a little too gentle. You need to be more firm. So anyway, but whatever works, okay? But I've pushed down and I've got this nice low dome now. And if it's still kind of lumpy, you can always recone it, do it again, right? And then re-plunge, push into your left hand. What you want to think about here, it's a lot of the process with ceramics. What you want to think about is like an isometric hold, if that makes sense. Basically, you don't need the strength to push something or pull something. What you need is the strength to hold still, right? So you just want to basically like kind of like lock in and make your hand stay still. It's just about being firm. It's not about being strong. It's about the ability to hold that hand still. So isometric is what I always say. But yeah, as we push down with our right hand, you can kind of rotate it even more to get more of this dome shape. But yeah, this is what you want at the end of the centering step. The way you can tell if something's centered is when you put your hands on it while it's spinning. See how my hands aren't going anywhere? That means it's centered, okay? If you're doing this, all right, you're moving, right, and you're like, hey, Mr. Wright, is it centered? I'm gonna say no, it's not centered, right? Because you're moving. What you want is it to spin in your hands without moving them around a lot, okay? You can try a one-handed center. You can try some other things, but yeah, the big thing is they should stay still. Another thing going along with that isometric hold deal is you should never really be moving your hands super fast. Slow down. Hand movement should be slow. Put your hands on the clay slow. Take your hands off. It might even look like I'm doing it fast, but it's actually very conscious movements, and it's a lot of like holding still, not moving a lot. If you ever catch yourself trying to like massage the clay or like catch an edge or something that you see like is lumpy on one part, you're messing it up, right? Just let your hands stay still and get rid of that lump. Which actually reminds me too, if you have a lump of clay that sort of squeezes out under here, right, from where you slam the clay down, and as you centered it, there was like a little lump, it's a good idea to take your finger and just push right here to get rid of that, and you can kind of peel that off and put it in your bucket, right? If you leave that clay that squishes out under your hands there, you'll just like never be able to get it centered. The other thing I've just remembered I want to say too, if you're getting a mushroom top while you're trying to center it, something like this, that's because you're pushing too much with your pinky and ring fingers, or you're more like folding the clay over itself instead of squeezing it into itself, if that makes sense. So to avoid that, just don't push quite as hard. But on the other side of that same coin, if you've got a lump that's like real bad, like you've got it centered, right? This looks really good, but you see there's a lump down here or something. You can also use that same like pinky and ring finger, at least part of your palm down here. You can use that to smooth that out. So that's handy to know, okay? But for making cylinders, this low dome shape at the end of centering is exactly what you want. You might be tempted to say, or to think that you want to make just like a nice straight cylinder, right? I'm going to make a cylinder, so let's get a cylinder in this part. That's not great, because what happens as soon as you push your hand down into it, it opens up and becomes like a V shape instead of a cylinder. So I promise you, it's easier for beginners to start with this nice low dome before you move on to the next step. This is what centering should look like. Then you should also go ahead and clean off any slop and extra stuff you have on your wheel and all that before moving on. And another note about centering, Well, this is a good point for you to pause and try to get to this stage, okay? And then when you get to this stage, you stop and start this video again. So there's that thrown out there. But the other thing I was gonna say is centering. Now that you've struggled with it, if you pause and all this sort of stuff, if you're doing it, this should not take you a super long time, okay? I see students all the time that center for like 20, 30, even 40 minutes, and they're just still struggling with the same piece of clay, just trying to get it centered. If you are over 20 minutes in centering the same piece of clay, my advice is to stop. You're never gonna get it centered. Cut this piece of clay off the wheel, go back and wedge it up again, and start over. Go get a drink of water, do something else, because you're psyched out. You're never gonna get it centered, okay? That's just my personal experience. It doesn't have to be that way, but I will say, as a beginner, your goal should be to get this done, get centering done in 5 to 10 minutes tops, okay? Eventually, your goal should be less than a minute, okay? That's what most potters really aim for, but I'm not expecting that right away. 5 to 10 minutes is good. Aim for 5 minutes by the end of the semester, and you'll be all right, okay? So, yeah, that's centering. You should be good. Oh, and the reason I'll say that you want to do this fast, 2 reasons. One, if you take a super long time centering, you've kept adding water that whole time, and this thing, if you're at 40 minutes and you've been adding water, this is just going to be such a slop pile, you're never going to be able to get any height out of it. The other reason is, if you take 25 minutes to center something and you move on to the next step, there's a good chance that in just a few seconds, you're going to knock it off center, okay? And you're going to have to re-center and reconsider and do all that sort of stuff. But if you spent 25 minutes doing that and then you immediately knock it off center, you're going to be so discouraged, you're going to hate it, okay? But if you only center it in 4 minutes, 5 minutes, maybe a little more, and you knock it off center, you're going to be a lot more able to just take a breath and kind of fix it, okay? So that's why I say center quick. Also, as far as your wheel speed goes, shouldn't go full speed, but you'll go pretty fast at the beginning. Like I said, I did kind of say that before, but to reiterate, faster during centering, and then we're going to slow down for this next step. So the next step is making the well, or the inside of the pot, basically, okay? For this step, the left hand is just a spotter, okay? It's just hanging out here to help out if it's needed, and it's making sure nothing goes wrong. It's mostly your right hand doing the work here as far as how I teach it. Okay, so I may leave my left hand out of this video, this portion some, but you'll have it here, just so you know while you're working. So anyway, for this step, you're gonna make sure there's plenty of water on your hands and on the clay. Then you're gonna put your palm right up against the piece of clay, and you're gonna make sure this elbow's locked in at the thigh or the side, wherever you need it, and you're just gonna start pushing directly into this piece of clay, the middle of this piece of clay. Okay, don't go off to the side, don't go way off to the side for sure. If you ever get this like kind of nub of clay that keeps rising up while you're throwing, that's because you're moving off too much to the side. You want to go right down the middle. The other thing is, while you're doing this, since your left hand's here, a lot of people feel like they're not strong enough to do it with one thumb, so they'll insert both thumbs. The problem with this is you're pulling with this thumb and you're pushing with this thumb. And as far as I'm concerned, you'll never be able to get it perfectly even. So you want to just use one thumb, okay, as you insert it into here. Now, if you have that feeling like you're not strong enough with just the one thumb, what you can do is take your left thumb, right, because it's your right thumb should be doing all the work here. Your left thumb can just push on the back of your right thumb to give it a little extra zhuzh, a little extra strength. I guess you could use a finger, whatever, but you just want to use that to help, to assist, not next to it, if that makes sense. Not like this, but like this. Okay, as you're pushing into the center of this piece of clay, it's going to dry out, so you're going to have to splash some water in there. And then the other thing is, make sure your thumb's not dancing all around, right? Don't do this. This is going to mean you're getting off center with that opening. You want to be sure that this is nice and stable as you move down. And keep the palm here. Do not, as you're pushing, you're going to have the urge to let this drift up, right, and get like this, but one, you're not going to have any strength. The other thing is, a lot of students do this because they're afraid to mess up this top edge, but in reality, you need to be pushing down on that top edge. Use this meaty part of your palm and that kind of webbing of your thumb to keep this rim nice and thick and rounded and good. You don't want to be letting your thumb drift up and you'll lose strength, you'll be all wobbly, and then this top edge will get all torn and frayed and thin. You don't want that. You want to keep this hand nice and down. Keep your palm pointed at the clay, even right up on it, okay? And that might mean that this opening needs to get wider. That's okay, okay? You do want to be sure that as you're pushing down, you push down with your thumb and don't just twist your wrist away from the clay, right? This is a no-no. Don't do that because it's just going to open it up into a bowl. We're keeping the palm on and pushing straight down. Okay, now, one of the trickiest parts of throwing is the fact that right here, during this step, there's no way to know when to stop, okay? Other than experience, practice, right? You'll know you've gone too far when you see the brown or black or orange bat through the bottom of it. You've gone through it, okay? That's about the only way to know you've done too much or you've gone too far. As far as too thick, you just, with practice, you figure it out. What I will recommend as a sort of tip for the thickness of the bottom of your pot is be sure you clean out all the water that you've got in there, and then set your pinky down just on the outside of your piece while it's spinning. Set your pinky down and look and imagine that the bottom of this interior hole that you made, right, it should be level with the top of your pinky. Okay, try that. That's a good tip. There are other ways to measure thickness and all sorts of stuff, but I don't like to teach those to beginners because there's some pitfalls of that, so like that. But that's the best one, and honestly, just practice, right, is going to be your best way to learn. So anyway, I have made the interior. Okay, I push down, got a good start point. Now, I've gotten the depth right, but I need more width, right? I've just got this thumb thickness. I want to be able to make a cylinder, right? So for this step, I flare my fingers out. I try not to keep my fingers in right here for this because there's a chance I'll pinch and just lift this whole top part of clay off. We don't want that. What we want is to flare our fingers, and then I flatten out my thumb, and I do what I call the skater thumb, okay? So I flatten it out, get my thumb, and again, it's okay if this gets a little wider, and keep it round with your palm. You're gonna lay your thumb flat, and I just skate it directly away from me. I skate my thumb across the bottom of the clay, and I'm pushing at the wall as it is. So the reason I call it the skater thumb is I think of it like an ice skater, right? It's skating on a nice, flat ice rink, right? It's flat outwards. I want to get it really level. If I go down too far, I'm going to start to go through and make the bottom too thin. If I go up too far, I'm really making a bowl, and I'm leaving a lot of clay behind that I could get into the walls of my pot, okay? And I can do this a few times and get a really nice flat base. And essentially, you want to push your thumb far enough out that it's like the entire interior width of your cylinder floor is already done. Okay, it's ready to go. I always say at the end of this step, it should look like a donut sitting on a pancake. I used to teach a lot of little kids to do this, and so it's sort of a silly analogy, but it works because it should be a thick, like ring of clay sitting on a flat disc. Okay, if at some point while you're doing that, it got off and you're not very centered, this is also a really great time. I taught myself to recenter right here when I was a beginner. What I did is I just put my palms, both palms now, on the side of the pot, and I inserted both thumbs and just tried to hold them steady. That whole struggle of pushing and pulling is less of an issue now because it's not about changing the shape, it's about steadying the shape a little bit. So I just sort of push, hold. It's not really about pushing or anything. I just try to hold it still again, and look, I've recentered, okay? That's what we want. If you get this double lip thing going from pushing your clay around and moving the inside and out, that's actually okay too. Don't worry about that. The big thing to avoid, just to reiterate, it's the same goes when you do your skater thumb. I said this a minute ago, to be sure you don't roll your wrist out and open it into a bowl. It's also important during the skater thumb that you don't do that. So it's undercutting the wall, so it's like that, okay? But the big thing, keeping the palm down, all this sort of stuff, palm into the center, thumb flat, all those things. Yeah, hopefully that's enough tips for that. You can always like pause and rewatch if you need to. This is usually in class where I pause again and I have my students do all those steps to kind of catch up. And then once you do that, you can, so if you want to pause the video, try this. And then when you get to this step, right, you can go ahead and go again. One thing I will say too is you want to get the water out of the bottom of your clay opening as soon as possible. Clay, especially here in the States, does not like to have water just sitting on the inside. So again, I just dip my sponge, wring it out, lower it in, clean up the bit. I also just like the bat being clean, and it's ready to go. And now we're moving on to the last of my like 3 major steps, pulling the wall. And I hate to say it, but everything up before this was easy, right? This is where it gets difficult. So for this step, we're going to be making the piece taller, and it's not really about pulling the clay. It's not about pinching the clay. I think of it as like, it's like spreading the clay, right? Like there's this thick portion that I just want to squeeze and sort of even out a bunch of times until it's much thinner and therefore taller, Okay, so that's how I would say that. So we're ready to go. Oh, you want to slow down quite a bit for this step. So centering's fast. Making the inside is a little bit slower, and now we're going pretty slow. But your hands need to move extra slow as well. Okay, so I'm getting this started. What you should notice, I don't know how well you guys can see. I'm actually going to come behind the camera and sort of see what you guys can see for this. Okay, it's hard to tell. I'm going to actually stop real quick, and I'm going to lift this up and bring it over here. So what you should see when you finish that second step is something like this. Donut sitting on a pancake, and it should have an undercut right here. If you put your fingers in or your thumb or something, you should feel that this part right here goes in under the walls, under this lip. And it should feel like this part of the wall, right where it meets the floor, is a little thinner than the top part, right? It should be thick up top and thinner down here. Not thin, but thinner. Okay, and that means you're in a good place, because now I'll explain what we're going to do with that, why that's important, right? We make sure that it is, and I want to be sure you guys are still watching at home. Yep, okay. So now what I'm going to do is essentially spread the clay out. So with each pull, this little thin portion down here, I'm basically making the walls all that same thickness. And as I do that, it's gonna essentially get taller, okay? So let me talk about that again. Oh, another thing here, it's very important when you start to pull that you switch your mind, and now your left hand is going to go inside the pot, okay? It's gonna go into this interior space, and your right hand's gonna stay outside. It doesn't work the other way, at least not very well. This is that tendency again, because if you go with your left hand outside, right inside, your fingers are going into the spin, and that can create some problems, okay? It definitely can't happen. You can't pull walls by doing all this mess, right? Where both your hands are outside. It's never gonna work. What you really need to get used to doing, and it's difficult, I know, but you wanna get your hands in position at about 3 o'clock. If this was a clock face, somewhere between 3 and 4 is where your hands need to be. And your palms should be pointed down. You should be able to look at the back of your palms. A lot of people want to do this kind of maneuver or this kind of thing. And I don't really know why. This isn't the end of the world, but I don't know why they want to flip it so their palms are up. I think maybe because their wrists just aren't used to this move and stuff, but you can't do that. Okay, you got to keep those palms down, your wrists, or you should be looking at the back of your hands. And essentially what I'm going to do here, with my first pull, you can kind of cheat. I'm going to kind of turn to the side again here. What you can do is sort of insert your left index finger into that area that I said is a little bit thinner. Then you're going to take your right index finger, put it directly across from it. And what I do here for the first pull is just go from like V shape to I shape. Okay, just like this. And what that's going to do is sort of squeeze that clay up. Again, I've drifted my elbows. Don't do that. Right, I could kind of pull it off, even though I shouldn't have. But yeah, what you should do, V shape, squeeze your hands in together, and try to get the whole wall of clay to be the same thickness from top to bottom, where it meets the floor to the tippy top, okay? That's your first pull already done, okay? Now, it's probably gonna give you this kind of double rim thing. What you can do here is sort of, and you should do this after every pull, take your left hand and lightly grip the edge, and then smooth out the rim with your right index finger. Okay, but now we got to do a real pull, okay, the full-on thing from start to finish. So for this, to get it started now, we've evened out the wall, so we have to make a new like thinness. And so for this, what I usually recommend students do, it's really good for demoing. You can go from the inside to make a thin spot, but it's really nice if you can take your right knuckle, right index knuckle or something, and sort of push up and create a ridge that moves up and makes a new thin spot down here at the bottom of your pot, right here, okay? And then you're gonna do the same thing you did before where you even it out, but it looks a little bit different. For this, I go left hand inside at about 3 o'clock, right hand outside directly across from it, right? They're directly across from each other like this. And I'm just going to, once I have the thickness sort of set in my mind, I'm just gonna start moving my hands upward, okay? Need a little more water, that's okay. Moving my hands upward, and I'm not letting them move apart. I'm also not pinching them to make them thinner if I can help it. I just want them to stay the same thickness. Now, as I got up to this rim, it started getting a little wonky and wobbly. It was just kind of soft clay. And so I did the thing again where I gripped the rim with my left hand and then sort of pushed and smoothed it with my right index finger. Totally allowed. Okay, but yeah, I went all the way to the rim, and then I stopped, and now I can do this again. I'm gonna get a little clay out that's sort of squished under my hand. I'm gonna push up to make a thin spot. You guys see that ridge, that thin spot? I'm gonna put my right middle finger on the outside, left middle finger inside, and I'm just gonna slowly being the key word here, move my hands up. And the higher you get, the slower you should go, right? The higher you get up on the wall, and you go all the way to the rim, all right? That's my best advice for how to do this, okay? You can, like I said, push from the outside to make it taller, but what I said a minute ago, you know, ideally we've got the cylinder interior sort of shaped, so we don't want to do that. Okay, so some tips about how to do this well. First off, what I see students do that messes it up right away and makes things kind of wobbly and uneven is they move their hands up too fast. Notice during this stage, I'm really, like I know I'm going fast, but it's really steady. It's nice and slow. And I go all the way through nice and slow. If you move too fast, what you'll end up with, let me see if I can demonstrate this. If you go too fast, what happens is students, they do the bottom part of the pull really great because they have all this stability down low, they can touch the bat, all this sort of stuff. But then when they get up here where their hands are floating, they get scared and they'll just go too fast. And notice what happens there, you get a little spiral, right? And that spiral, at the end of the pot, it might be okay to do that. It might be cool and decorative, but if you're doing it from the beginning and you keep doing it, you're gonna end up with this big lumpy, kind of wobbly rim that just doesn't work, and it's all because you just went too fast, okay? So going too fast is the first way to get uneven rims. The other one that I always talk about is students tending to move outward, okay? It's a strong urge as you start to do this, as you settle in and keep trying it more and more, that you want to like either sit up, right, or lean to the side. And both of those things, if you sit up, you'll start to pull towards yourself, and if you lean to the side, you'll pull out towards yourself. That's always how it happens. So what you need to do for a cylinder is keep it in, because the problem when you pull outward and make it like a V shape is clay can't really go back in. You can try to push it in, and with enough practice, you can get kind of good. But honestly, when you move clay back in, it doesn't have anywhere to go. And so it starts to push the rim up, and you'll end up with an uneven rim. So while pulling, you need to be sure you don't drift out or drift up and end up making a V shape or a bowl. And also remember, the clay wants to be a bowl. It's centrifugal force is spinning it outward. So it doesn't need much help from you to get too wide. You need to fight that and try to keep it locked inward. The best advice I have is really lean over your pot, be right above it, and kind of pull towards your nose. And you can even sort of pull it like a cone shape. A lot of beginners, if you try to make it a cone shape, like nice and straight up and down, if you're trying to do that, so if you try to make it inward, you'll end up making it straight up and down. Okay, that's my advice. Usually, I see beginners, if they try to do it as a cone, they'll end up making it straight. If they try to do it straight, they end up making it a bowl. Okay, so think about that. The third thing I always see students do that makes it uneven, honestly, and it's the most common, is that they just don't hold their hand steady enough. Like as you're moving up, you let your fingers drift apart or pull, and you can kind of fix that sometimes, but it's going to make the rim uneven, right? And a lot of times, the more you try to fix it, the worse it gets and all that sort of stuff. So slowing down, keeping your hands even, and not pulling too far out. Those are the best ways to avoid getting a real uneven pot. There's also things like, I try to make sure my students, it's part of why I say keep your palms down, is you should use your fingers, right? And even like the side of your fingers. Use your fingertips, use the side of your fingers. Try not to use your whole palm. This is very tempting, and it's not that it's the end of the world, but what you're creating is a lot of friction, right? Because it's your whole palm instead of just your fingertips, and it tends to want to twist the cup up, okay? That's not great. So don't do that. And then the other thing, of course, I already said, is like a lot of students, right, they'll like see there's a lump here, and they'll try to like catch it. Don't ever do that, okay? It's just gonna mess you up. It's all about keeping your hands steady and in place, okay? All right? I think that's probably enough tips as far as pulling. It just takes a lot of practice. Not every hand position I talk about is the perfect one, but in general, it's a good start, all right? Now, looking at this piece, the reason I teach you to make cylinders is from here, we could flare the rim. We could push a belly out. We could do all kinds of different shapes that, again, if you already push it out into a bowl shape, it's really hard to get it back into some other shape. The cylinder is a nice base shape that you can kind of work from in every direction. I'm going to do another video that's going to be much quicker, that's just about shaping. Okay, it's just about how to alter the shape once you've got a cylinder. But for now, what I'm going to teach you is how to clean this piece up. So the cleaning up step and getting it off of the wheel is what I call sponge rib, sponge rib. Okay, so I grab my sponge, I dip it in the bucket like I've done 15 times while talking. I wring it out, and then I hold on to it very well while I lower it down into the pot and get all the excess water and slop out of the base of the pot. And then as I'm pulling the sponge out, I might lightly let it kind of rub the inside of the pot, okay, and get all that goop. Okay, that's what we want. Something I thought about just a second ago, it was sort of implicit, but I forgot to say. When you're pulling, right, when you pull up to the rim, don't pull through. Okay, that's another thing that will make your rim uneven, is if you pull through. If you pull through, you know, go all the way, it tends to do this. See that mark right there? That's what, you know, if you do it like a tennis or baseball bat swing, tennis racket or baseball bat swing, that's what you're going to end up with. And that will also make an uneven rim. The other things I forgot to say about pulling as well, if you have a really thick top and a thin bottom, you can just pull the top half. And same vice versa. If the bottom still feels really thick to you, but the top is getting thin, you can always just pull the bottom portion and then lighten up your pressure. You might finish the move of pulling, but you lighten up the pressure so that it doesn't actually thin out the top anymore. But you can kind of, pull different sections. It doesn't have to be a full pull every time. And the other thing is, if you've got a really thick rim in general, that just means you're not going far enough in your pull. Remember, the idea is to get this rim the same thickness as the thin spot that you made in the bottom of your wall, right? So you pull up all the way until it's nice and thin. If it's real thick up here, you're just not pulling far enough. Okay, anyway, back to cleaning. Sponge rib, sponge rib. I clean the inside. Now I'm gonna go to my rib. I'm grab this for the first time in this lesson. And all I'm gonna do here, I might push from the inside, I don't really need to. What I'm gonna do here is just use, for me personally, I always use the flat side, but there's no reason you can't use the curved side for this. And I'm just gonna scrape up the outside of the pot and get all the slip and slop off of it. You can see how much goop I grabbed in both of those pulls, right? I got a lot of goop off. If you don't do that step, if you just cut this off and forget to do the scrapey step with the rib, when you pick this up, it's gonna be so slippy, sloppy, it's easy to drop, and you're gonna get fingerprints everywhere. So I recommend not skipping that step. Get that, okay? And after we've scraped the outside, very, very patiently and lightly, I'll give it one more just so you guys can see it, top to bottom. I almost like roll the rib up the side. Yeah, and even with that one, I got a lot more off, okay? But now, done the outside, done the inside, I'm gonna get some more off of the inside. And I'm just going to, at this point, take my sponge, this is the second sponge of sponge rib, and I basically just roll it very lightly on the rim of my pot, just around it, and get any extra goop that was settled up there off of the rim. So, sponge inside, rib outside, sponge rim, and then the last step is another rib step. And so for this, what I want you to observe on your pot when you're making it is you'll see there's a little bit of clay that's like squished out where the pot meets the bat, okay? And if we cut it with that there, what essentially happens is you end up with this real thin, kind of flaky, chippy rim that can cut you, or it's just gonna chip a lot while you're messing with it, and it's just not great. So what we want is to go back in with an undercut. Sometimes it has to be a lot of undercut, sometimes it's just a little bit. And if you've kind of followed my steps, hopefully it's not too much. But for this, what you wanna do, make sure you have a pointy-ended rib. You're gonna put the flat side on the bat, you should hear scraping, and then you're gonna stick the pointy end just directly into the bottom of your pot. Now, this should be fairly low risk, right? Don't be super worried because you're sticking into the bottom, which is solid, right? You're not going into the wall, definitely don't do that, but you're just sticking into the bottom, and you're essentially gonna make this undercut that gets rid of that little squish down there and push in. Now, a little tip I have is to tilt it a little bit towards yourself and even angle the pointy end towards you. And what that will do is make sure that as the clay peels off of the bottom, it sticks to the rib, and not, if you go like this, squish, it's just gonna push the clay back up onto the pot, okay? Now, if you do get a little bit of it, just use your sponge to clean it up, okay? I'll talk about this in another video where I'm gonna talk about how to finish this later, after you cut it off of the bat, how to finish this bottom. You can leave a little bit of clay down there, a little shelf, and it makes some things a lot easier later, like dipping glazes, and if you ever want to use a runny glaze, it's kind of nice to leave that little shelf or ledge of clay that folds back up right here. But I'll talk about that more in the finishing video. I'm going to even take a little bit more off of this. Boom, nice undercut, and it is now ready to cut off of the wheel. Okay, for this, I cut off with the wheel spinning, but for you guys, for beginners, I always tell you to cut it off without it spinning. So what I do, I stop the wheel, I get a big, like kind of splash of water that I put on the bat opposite side of the pot from me, right? It's over here, okay? And then I'm gonna grab my wire tool, right? This is where this thing comes in clutch. Besides getting it off, helping you get clay off the block, this is the main use of the wire tool. We're gonna go ahead and roll our hands or push our hands all the way out to the handle, but we're not going to use the whole wire tool. If we do that, we've got to compete with the splash pan and the buckets, all sorts of stuff. What we really want to do is run our hands out and then leave one hand on the handle, take the other, I usually do my right hand, and I roll the wire around my fingers a bit so I can pull this really tight, but just have a little narrow slice of wire that's actually going to be what I slide underneath the pot. So I pull really tight, and then I'm going to push down. I'm going to get the wire down into that puddle of water that I made. It's a pretty good amount of water. I'm going to roll it through that, and I'm going to keep the pressure down tight as I pull out tight. My hands are sore by the end of the day in this little spot where the wire goes in because I need to use a lot of pressure. If you get any slack at all, you're going to cut through the bottom of your pot. Okay, so we get this, we pull towards ourselves, bing, 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 just get that water to kind of slide underneath your pot and make a little barrier between your pot and your base. Now, sometimes this happens, what you'll see on mine is the wire actually pulled the pot off of the base, the little disc. That's fine. You might just get a friend or very patiently take your thumb or something and push it off, but you don't want to just freak out and lift up the wire because you will slice a portion of your pot off, okay? So then you'll take this, let go of it very carefully because there's always this little like sludge that's kind of stuck from where it cut, and your neighbor doesn't want that in their nose. If you're sitting next to someone working with this, you don't want it in your nose either. So yeah, just take it off slow, do that nice and easy. Then clean your hands. This is a great way to avoid getting smudges on your pot, okay? Clean your hands, dry them on your towel, not your apron, but your towel. And then kind of what I say, spin it so that the puddle is sort of towards you. And what I like to do is take my right hand and sort of spin and pull towards myself so that, yeah, the pot's just slipping around on this slip and slide, okay? And then I'm gonna take my left hand, catch it, and it might distort your rim a little bit, but it's okay. If you've got your board ready close by, you can pick this up, set it down, and it'll go back to round, okay? That's what you want. Now, if when you go to do this, it feels like it's stuck again, you can always cut it again. Don't freak out, it's all good, you will get it off. If you made something too wide to get off of the bat, you still want to cut it, right? But if you can't pick it up because it's too big and sloppy, just take your bat, set it aside for 15, 20, 30 minutes, and let it kind of set up until it's stiff enough that you can pick it up, okay? That's what you want to do. Now, while you're practicing cylinders, it is a good idea for you to occasionally cut the cylinders in half and give yourself an idea of how throwing is going for you. So I'd say that's pretty good. It got a little thinner at the top, but for the most part, there's a little clay I could maybe have moved up right here, and I made the base a little thin. But for the most part, nice and even. That's what we want. Not too thin, not too thick. Yeah, and you could, like I said, if you didn't do that, if you want to keep this, you just set it on a board. If you want to add handles to it, you're going to have covered in plastic, which hopefully I covered in class for you, how to cover stuff in plastic. If not, it's pretty basic. Just wrap stuff well in plastic so that it doesn't dry out. It's better to wrap it too tight and have to dry it with a hair dryer or something than it is to let it dry out too much, and then you can't add handles or whatever to it. But another thing, yeah, if you take your pot, put it on the board, let it set. I have some different techniques for finishing it, whether it's at the leather hard stage, which means like half dry before you add a handle, or if it's totally dried out. I have some different techniques. I want to make a different video for that though, because obviously this has gone on long enough. But yeah, set that down. You're good to go. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. As far as cleaning, I do need to go ahead and say this. When you're done with your wheel, it's very important. What you want to do is take your tools and everything, set them aside, get your sponge, and get all of the water and goop out of your splash pan, off of the bat. get everything and sponge it into your bucket. All the water, all the stuff, get it, sponge it into your bucket. All the slop, slip, whatever, wipe it all down, get it into your bucket. Then you're going to take the bucket, you're going to go over to our reclaim buckets, which I've showed you in class. They're just the big bins by the back door. You're going to dump the whole thing in there. The slop, the water, all the clay goes into that bucket. Okay, make sure you've taken your tools out. Don't leave your tools in there and dump them in there, especially the sharp tools. That's kind of scary. But you're going to dump it all out. Get as much clay out as you can. Then you're going to go to the sink and you're going to follow our typical cleaning procedure where you clean the tools and the bucket in the buckets that are in the sink. Then rinse them in the sink. Then put all the tools back and put the buckets back. And then the last thing you want to do is go grab one of the big yellow sponges and wipe this whole thing down again. You can even take the splash pans off and clean them in the slop buckets, in the sink, and all that sort of stuff. But this whole thing needs to be spotless after you leave, okay? I think that's probably good enough. Yeah, like I said, there will be more videos for finishing. I'm going to do another video about how to shape, another video about how to make bowls, how to trim, how to pull handles, all that kind of stuff. So look forward to those, and I hope you enjoyed this one.